Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, back to the Valley of the Judged. I am your one and only gaming monk, better known as Mildra, and with me is my good brother here in the temple, coming to us from the Story Illuminations, fresh off of triggering half of the country with his takes on Thanksgiving sides. Good brother Monarch.
I stand by it. Stuffing is terrible.
I can't really talk because I put up that meme of the whole one gotta go kind of thing. Just a few days before Thanksgiving. So you got nine things you'd see at Thanksgiving dinner, and you got to get rid of one of them. The options were turkey, rolls, mashed potatoes, mac and cheese, stuffing, pies, green bean casserole, ham, and gravy. I limited green bean casserole because it is not called casserole where I come from. It is hot dish. These are the rules. Also green bean hot dish is always disgusting.
I've never even seen anyone serve mac and cheese at Thanksgiving.
I have, but it's usually mac and cheese with something mixed in. Usually the lobster mac I get from a local restaurant because we have an arrangement where I can just get a big old tray of that stuff. But that's a special circumstance. Now, if I really wanted to start a riot, I'd say get rid of cranberry sauce. But they do that anyways.
That was the other one I agreed with.
But they do that anyways because just in case I show up. Because even after 7+ years, I'm still living rent-free in their head. So, last time we came on for the Gaia complex, we tackled the character creation setup, which is pretty straightforward. It avoids, I think one of the main takeaways with what we said last week on it is a lot of the pitfalls that happen with plenty of the bigger names in cyberpunk role-playing games are quite avoided here. We did have a bit of an eyebrow raised when it came to some of the roles, especially the non-human ones. But once we understand what you get out of them, it started to make sense. I also gave a bit of a hint on how the die system is going to work here, what's referred to as the 12.3 system. And you'll kind of see why that is the case. But the big pitfall that this game avoids is not drowning me in skills and sub-skills.
Now, remember, I kind of thought we were going to put a bit of a pin just on hacking because we haven't really seen how that's going to work yet.
Mm-hmm.
But this doesn't seem like that complex of a system, so I'm not expecting the game within a game that hacking tends to be in other cyberpunks.
Yeah, I mentioned this last week, but over the last decade and change, we've started to see hacking mechanics in cyberpunk games shift away from that mini-game duet approach that I talked about beforehand, and more into having it be an extension of either the combat system or the skill system, or just having it more integrated within the core mechanics instead of it being a separate thing. And in stuff like Vault, it's an alternate form of attack. Even Cyberpunk 2077 kind of has it in that way. You know, where net running is just a separate type of abilities that you can spec into. I'm vastly simplifying, of course, but the point is to illustrate that there's been a shift away from that minigame-like approach, because I can guarantee you, we're not the only ones who have that problem.
But yeah. We will start off the rules. We do have a note from the writer we're going to read first, just before the actual rules page starts.
Yeah,
So the note from Ryder, we have Shep here. The reason for this note is to quickly explain my game design ethos. I am a huge fan of role-playing. That is to say, I always aim to put more emphasis on actually making my players talk their way through a game by playing the part of the characters. I have run many game sessions where the dice have simply never been rolled, only using a character's stats and skills as a reference for success and failure. However, I acknowledge that this approach is not for everyone, and the age-old love of rolling dice is what makes many GMs feel in control of the action and players in control of their characters. As a result, this rule set is designed to toe the line between a light, streamlined role-playing experience and something with a little more depth. The rules system used by the Gaia complex has become known simply as 12.3, and is, at the time of publishing, unique to the Gaia complex, but expect to see it on other stuff I write and publish in the future. The system uses a combination of 12-sided and 3-sided, or 6-sided if you don't want to own odd-shaped dice, and is relatively light in the grand scale of RPG systems. I hope you enjoy playing the game using the 12.5, and throughout the following rules chapter, you will find a number of optional rules, which should be left out should the players and GM wish to focus more on the storytelling and social aspect of the game. I would also urge GMs to try my preferred style of gaming and simply ignore many of the rules as written in favor of sense checking and directing the action in a way that most makes sense. Most importantly is the golden rule: have fun, whether that means using every rule in the book or ignoring them all entirely. Just enjoy playing the Gaia complex. I kind of like we have an actual just spelled out ethos here for kind of how this game was put together. Sets the expectations immediately.
Yeah, and I've seen a lot of games romanticize their take on role playing, but at least here there's an acknowledgement that different tables are going to approach the system in different ways. I think that's part of the problem that I have with the more story game-like approach, i.e. it has a very my way or the highway kind of way. Yes, I am using that to snipe at Monster because how could I not?
Doesn't count, it's not a game. I stand on that.
I've seen plenty of story games in that same mode of thinking. So it's nice to see that you have an acknowledgement of, you know, this is how I prefer playing, but you don't have to play the same way I do. That and whenever I hear people talk up about the role-playing approach that they take, one of the key things I end up having to say back is, this is still a game. I think that's what a lot of people forget when they talk about how we need to add more story. Or worse, you have those games that try to make a big damn deal about the fact that they don't have combat. Meanwhile, I'm sitting there going, whoop-de-doo, you don't have combat. What else you got? But shifting away from that before I go into another rant that's going to get a bunch of grogs pissed off at me again, we move into skill tests, which is going to be the core kind of role that you're going to be doing for the most part. After a bit of description about what skill tests are, which is going to be redundant for us because this isn't our first rodeo with skill tests, we then move into skill difficulty. Whenever a situation might require a skill test to be performed, be it trying to hack into a computer terminal, pick a lock, or deliver medical aid, the GM should consider the complexity of the task at hand and assign it a difficulty ranging from 1 to 11, where 1 is very easy and 11 is almost impossible. The difficulty rating of any test is directed towards another character. Is equal to the subject's applicable stat, such as guts for intimidate, allure for persuasion, etc. The GM is, however, free to set or adjust the difficulty as they deem appropriate, but it is suggested that common sense is applied to avoid paralysis through too many high difficulty tests and to allow the action of the game to keep flowing. Once the difficulty rating is determined, the skill test can be performed. Then we have skilled versus unskilled. A character is always considered to be skilled or unskilled. We kind of covered that a little bit during character creation. There's no skill levels. You either have it or you don't. If a character is skilled in the required area and their applicable stat is equal to or greater than the difficulty rating, the test is passed automatically, providing the character is not under duress, i.e. in combat, etc. This is called an auto pass. When a character is in combat or under any form of duress, being intimidated, held captive, etc., an auto pass is not normally permitted and an active skill test should be required. If the character is unskilled or is skilled but does not have the applicable stat at the required rank, then an active test must be performed to determine success. Some in-game effects can reduce the difficulty of a test, thus making it more likely that a skilled character may auto-pass. And then we get to the actual active skill tests, and I will let you take over on that.
So to perform an active skill test, the player should roll 2d12. The dice are not added together, instead they will present two separate results. Excuse me. Any die result that is equal to or less than the character's stat after modification is a success. Any die result that is higher than the stat is a failure. The number 12 is always a failure and represents a chance of a critical failure explained below. A skilled character only requires one die success to pass a skill test, whereas an unskilled character requires both die success to pass. Any character that does not achieve the result will fail a skill test. This can be surmised as follows. One die success, the test is passed if the character is skilled. Two die successes, the test is passed whether skilled or unskilled. Additionally, a skilled character may replenish 1 point of grit at the GM's discretion, and 2 dice failures. The test is failed. If either or both dice roll the 12, this is considered a critical failure. Note a number of additional modifiers may apply to dice rolled during combat, as described in the chapter later.
Mm-hmm.
The following elements must always be considered when making an active skill test. Complexity modifiers. Optionally, the GM may choose to apply a modifier between 1 and 3 to the value shown on the dice during any non-attack skill test to represent the complexity. It is suggested that such modifiers are reserved only for special cases and do not become the norm. There is one modifier which should always be applied. A +1 modifier to all awareness skill tests during any firefight or combat situation. This represents the distracting nature of being involved in the fog of war, from the deafening hum of gunfire to the tunnel vision that comes with being violently attacked. Then we get a nice little example.
Mm-hmm.
I will say, for a +1, which would be like the lowest, that feels low considering what was just described. That's a pretty intense situation.
Yeah,
but that may just be a thing of they just don't want to make awareness pointless in combat.
Mm-hmm. Plus,
so I think that was more of a sense thing.
It's a +1 on a D12.
Yeah.
Like if this was a +1 on a D20, I could see that, but you've got a much smaller range.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like that is the lowest possible, though, for a situation that, at face value, sounds like it would be a more extreme one. But for the sake of not making awareness pointless in combat, I think I'm still okay with it just being the +1, because I don't know how you'd get around that otherwise. But then we got specializations. Any character with a specialization in the applicable skill is permitted to re-roll one of their dice that did not roll a 12. This re-roll is permitted each time the skill is used for a test. As a result of a 12 may never be re-rolled through a specialization. Then we get advanced skill tests. Certain skills are considered to be advanced and are marked with an A. This represents areas of learning that require significant training or knowledge, such as providing medical care, piloting an aircraft, or installing cybernetics. Such tasks are complex, dangerous, and can rarely be passed on luck alone. Advanced skill tests will generally attract complexity modifiers more regularly than other skill tests, to reflect the difficulty of such tasks. In addition, any failure earned by an unskilled character during an advanced skill test is considered to be a critical failure regardless of the die roll. And then we get critical failures. Any active skill test resulting in a failure that also has a 12 showing on either die is considered a critical failure. A critical failure results in the loss of 1 point of grit, and should the character have any available to lose. A die result of a 12 may not be modified by grit or other bonuses unless a rule specifically states otherwise. A critical failure is also an opportunity for the GM to appropriately hinder the character and/or their team depending on the situation. The GM is free to assign any penalties they fit, including, but not limited to, physical harm or loss of I'm assuming that's endurance hit points if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
And or morale. Failure in the current task and the inability to attempt the task again. Receiving misinformation that hinders or puts the character in a dangerous or compromising situation. Just triggered alarms or traps, etc. Or to jam a firearm, drop a weapon, or accidentally trigger explosives. See rules for combat.
Mm-hmm. And of course, on the next page, it does go into what grit is. And grit is essentially this game's what I call extra effort mechanic. I know some people call it meta currency or something like that, but that always sounds cringeworthy. Plus, I don't like how some people, as I've mentioned many times, over-exaggerate the impact of having a meta currency. Some people are like, oh, you're taking away from the narrative. It's like, no, you're not. It's just another form of doing the narrative through mechanics. Not having meta currency doesn't make your game any better or worse. I remember somebody was like, we don't have any meta currency, it's all about the dice. I'm like, okay. No, it's like being in an alcohol-free zone and announcing that you're straight edge. One, why are you making that announcement? And two, nobody cares. But grit, the parallels to something like grit would be things like willpower in World of Darkness, Moxie in Eclipse Phase, and more appropriately here, Edge in Shadowrun. And there's a couple ways that you can spend grits. One, during an active skill test, you can spend any amount of grit to apply a -1 modifier to both dice for each point of grit spent. You can spend them this way after the dice are rolled, but you cannot modify a natural 12. Or at any time you can spend grit to replenish morale. Additionally, certain game elements such as abilities granted by your roll or installed cybernetics may require a point of grit to be spent in order to use their effects. Any such abilities will have the cost clearly noted in their descriptions. I think we saw a few of them in that case. So now you know how that works. And remember, this is also why having skills is going to be important. Not for giving you a better die roll, but for giving you an opportunity to get a point of grit. Because remember, if both dice succeed when you make a roll, you get 1 point back. And I'm glad that you have that option there, because a problem that can happen with a lot of extra effort systems is the rainy day paradox. Or the 99 mega elixirs. You know, people saving it up for a rainy day that never comes. But here you can spend it easy and you can get it back relatively easy. I mean, you can't overspend, obviously, but you've got a way to get it back. That doesn't involve a session ending or or long rest or a season change or something like that. Yes, I am taking a shot at the once per long rest kind of things. But then we get into combat. And the first thing that they bring up is distance and range, which is on a broad zone kind of setup, not necessarily grid combat. The zones in question are close, medium, long, and distant. Close is the area that combatants occupy. Medium is like the opposite end of a street. Also noting that... Actually, I'll get to the weapon types later. Long is things like other side of an industrial complex. Distant would be far off buildings. So close range weapons would be close. Medium range, things like submachine guns and rifles would be medium. Also pistols and shotguns would be close range. Assault rifles and heavy machine guns would be considered long range. And sniper rifles would be considered distant range. In addition, there's also touch range, which is for melee weapons or unarmed combat. But then we get to initiative, which...
Okay, I have one comment here.
What?
It's going to describe touch range immediately below that table. Why wasn't it just included on the table? Is there any reason? It's... I see no reason for this, and it is annoyingly unnecessarily.
Is this one of those triggering your OCD kind of moments?
Yes, it shouldn't irritate me, but it does.
It's just sitting there taunting you. You know, it's like an open CD tray.
Yes.
But again, then we have initiative, which is equal to your reflexes or perception stat, whichever is higher, plus 1d12. Highest goes first, the rest is pretty standard. Should there be a draw, highest reflexes break the tie. If there's still a draw, it's up to the GM. Honestly, whenever a draw comes up, whenever I'm calculating initiative, and if it's still after the stat, I will always flip a coin like it's the opening coin flip in a football game.
Yeah, I don't know if I like the idea of the GM arbitrarily deciding this one.
Though that's that's in the case where there's a tie even after comparing reflexes. So I think in that case, it's not just an issue of a tie, it's an issue of a tie of a tie.
Yeah.
Those things do happen, but they're not exactly common.
Yeah, I'm with you though. Just flip a coin. It's not going. That is not going to tie. And if magically your coin somehow lands on the edge and doesn't fall over, I don't know. I think there should be something special in this case. You do, because that was a miracle.
I will admit, when it comes to initiative, one thing that I do, and I'd probably do it in this case, is that if somebody manages to crit, then if they do a critical success, then they get one free action right at the start. If they critically fail, then they skip the first round. So a lot of games, when it comes to the die rolling, they don't really do anything for crit successes or failures, or have it that crits only matter in these specific circumstances but don't matter in other circumstances. I've never been a fan of that.
In the case here, I'd want to see how combat plays out before I'd agree if that's a good idea or not. Because it could be a case where that additional extra action may just be breaking to a point.
Mm-hmm.
There are systems like that.
Yeah. But then we get to combat rounds. We're operating on a 3-second rule instead of a 6-second rule for rounds. Though you can increase or decrease that amount of time if it makes sense as a GM. During each combat round, you get 1 movement action, 1 supporting action, and one close combat attack or ranged attack. And movement actions are move, charge. Supporting actions are reload, swap, draw, or pick up a weapon, unjam a weapon, administer medical care, jack into a hacking rig, perform a hacking action, rally, stand up, perform a drone action, meld, only for ferals, and anything else deemed suitable. And attack actions are exactly what you think it is. So when it comes to movement, it's pretty standard fare. You're moving from one area to the other. It's because of the fact that this is leaning more into theater of the mind. It's treating it very loose as far as what your movement speed is. You're just moving from one zone to another. Though moving further zones might take more actions. Whereas charge is essentially a move and then directly do a close combat attack.
One thing I'll point out a move. It does say a character with a brawn or reflex stats or 7 or greater with athletics should be considered faster and be able to reach the extremes of the closed zone and maybe into the medium zone. I'm not entirely sure I'm on board with a bit of the vagueness here. Like, when would that be doable? When would it not be doable? Are we going to see some more details on that a bit later? I'd like a little more clarification on that bit.
Mm-hmm. And moving within touch range of a combatant is considered a charge. Though I'm a bit iffy on the whole circumvented no more than a single obstacle.
Because, like, what if you got a parkour guy? That's very easily doable with this setup.
Or, barring that, bull in a china shop.
Yeah.
But then we have supporting actions. Some of these are pretty standard minor action approaches. Reload is exactly what you think it is, though heavy weapons require 2 rounds to reload. Which would certainly make sense. I mean, if you're reloading like a heavy machine gun, that's not something you're going to be doing very quickly. You know, much like reloading an old musket isn't going to be something you do all that fast.
Yeah.
Let's see, swapping weapons, it's pretty self-explanatory. Unjamming a weapon also takes 2. Unjamming taking 2 combat rounds, or 1 if you're gonna spend 1 grit. I'm 50-50 about that.
On one, it is something in my head is like, well, that'd clearly depend on the weapon. Some are gonna be easier to unjam. On the other, I'm like, I don't think I'd want to just drain 2 rounds of doing nothing out of a player. Which is effectively what that feels like. So I don't think I like it.
I'd probably put it down to one action or a freebie if you spend 1 grit.
Yeah.
You know, reduce it by 1. Reduce the scale by 1.
Yeah. Maybe longer in some weird extreme critical failure type situations.
But it does say if the character is
yeah.
pinned or in a critical state, the time this takes is increased by 1 additional round. Any character who possesses the weapon's tech skill can ignore this additional time penalty. That I'm perfectly fine with.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're getting your ass kicked, you're not going to be able to be as focused. That's just a fact. And we have administer medical care, so your medic role. Delivering medical care takes anywhere from 3 combat rounds upwards, as specified by the GM. While quickly injecting a painkiller or clotting agent may be relatively quick, performing any kind of field surgery or tending to serious wounds can often last the duration of a firefight. When it comes to that kind of time range, this is one of those things where I think a little bit of guidance is warranted. Like if you're using an item as opposed to performing surgery, I could see that kind of range, but it seems a little broad. But then we get into jacking into a hacking rig. So you can jack into a hacking rig during combat as part of your action. This includes both the handheld versions known as hard rigs or those installed in your own neural frame, providing an access point is available to the combatant. It's a swift process and can be completed in as little as 2 combat rounds, declaring their intent to do so 1 round and completing the action in the subsequent round. Depending on the situation and accessibility to the access point, the GM may choose to have this action take longer to perform. Once a character is jacked in, they can perform a range of hacking or biohacking activities, discussed in the core and biohacking chapters. We'll get to that later. But then we have performing a hacking action. Any character that is jacked into the core can perform a hacking action, such as using a program to disable a countermeasure or decrypt a file. And performing a drone action, self-explanatory, you have the drone do your action instead of you do it. Rally is a way to regain morale, I suppose. And it's going to have more detail on the morale section. Stand up, self-explanatory. Meld, we kind of already covered that when we briefly talked about Feral. And of course, anything else deemed suitable. So, I get what's happening with these supporting actions, but I think I think the only thing we have a bit of disagreement on is how long they should take with some of them.
Yeah.
I mean, fortunately, you're still getting a attack option, so it's not like you're completely spending all your time hacking or something like that. But in cases like unjamming or jacking in, I don't know. I feel like two rounds might be a bit much.
Yeah. I'm not fond of stuff that just leaves the player going like, oh, I guess I'm just doing nothing for a couple of turns. Even though technically they are doing something, but it's just not active on their part, and I don't like that.
It's a bit of a... You're not a fan of a bottleneck.
Yeah. Like, 1 turn, okay. When it gets past that, it just starts to get boring for some people.
I feel like it's somewhat analogous to things like an aim action, where you're spending 1 round setting up, and then the next round doing the follow through.
Yeah.
But something about it doesn't sit right with.
Now, it might not be so bad with this game because I think the rounds are kind of built to go by a lot quicker.
Mhm.
I don't think it excuses it entirely, but it might not be so bad in this case.
Mhm.
Which is why I'm fine with the 1-round setup.
Yeah. But then we have attack actions, which all require an active skill test. No attack rolls can ever be subject to an auto pass unless the GM deems it so. And first we have close combat attacks. These are attacks that are within touch range of an opposing combatant. Let's see, each melee weapon has its own profile in the Gear and Tech chapter. The weapon's profile provides all the information you need to use the weapon, English monk. And then they give an example with the Dire Arms D4 dagger. Skill used is melee weapons or throwing. Damage is 2d3 plus 1 E. Range is touch/close, and no special rules. And the E represents that the target is inflicted against endurance in this case. And some weapons will
I think that's probably going to be the default for pretty much every weapon. Good thing they specified, but
Yep. Of course, we have a similar thing with unarmed attacks. They do 1d3 plus 1 endurance. But they do have a special rule. Characters with a bronze stat of 9 inflict plus 1 damage. Characters with a bronze stat of 10 inflict plus 2 damage. Animals using teeth or claws inflict additional damage as stated on their individual profiles. But we also have a few modifiers for close combat, and this is where we get into that +1 to +3 range of modifiers for complexity. This is just more circumstance. So charging a target, or was charged by the target this round, +1. Opponent is dodging, +2. Using a firearm, +2. Or using a firearm in close combat, +2. Opponent is fleeing from combat, -1. And the approach they have is that charging applies a +1 modifier to the roll to hit. But any successful close combat attack will inflict +2 damage. In addition, a +1 modifier is applied to all dice rolls to hit a charging combatant during the combat round that they charged. So you're harder to hit while charging. You take a bit of a penalty to your roll to hit, but you do more damage. It's like charging is a mix between a bull rush and a power attack all at once.
yeah, we get on to dodging.
Mm-hmm.
So when attacked in close combat, a combatant may attempt to dodge the incoming attack. If the combatant has not yet taken an action during this round, they may elect to dodge, applying a +2 modifier to the dice being rolled to hit them. A dodge must be declared before the roll to hit is performed. When it is a dodging combatant's turn to act this round, they will receive a +2 modifier to any active skill test they undertake. If the combatant has already acted this round, they may still dodge as normal, but may not perform an attack action during the following combat round. Other actions may be taken as normal, and receive a +2 modifier to any other active skill test they undertake. These penalties represent the combatant having dedicated themselves to dodging, making it harder to perform other tasks. The combatant may only attempt to dodge once per combat round unless they possess the athletic skill, in which case they may attempt to dodge twice. No additional penalties are applied for dodging a second time. I'm unsure about this. This is one of those situations. I think it came up a little when we talked Hellas too. I'm like,
The whole
shouldn't dodging kind of be the default of what you're doing? You're not just going to let him punch you in the face.
Yeah, the whole multiple action penalty we talked about in Hellas. And I've seen this in other games when it comes to limited use of focusing on dodging. Um, I can only use what we did for FF Legend as an example, because we don't have a limit when it comes to dodges or parries. The limitation in regards to both of them is you get a significant advantage if you succeed, but but if you fail, you make the damage worse on yourself. If you attempt to dodge and you fail, you're getting hit and you're not getting your armor bonus.
The case here, like, I just... Would anything be missing if they just dropped dodging?
Uh,
And again, just... Like, if this dodge rule just wasn't here, would we really be missing it? Would we be asking ourselves, why is there not a dodge mechanic? Because, again, you kind of just... In my head, you're just doing that anyway if someone's attacking you.
would you instead have melee attacks be treated as contested actions?
Maybe.
I think the limited dodge is where the issue comes in.
And that whole, like, you can't make your attack the following round, because if you happen to attack first and then get attacked back, what, you don't get an action next round?
Yeah.
That seems a little harsh.
It skews a bit towards defensive, and I'm not entirely given that this is an approach that wants to be quick and violent when it comes to its combat. I'm not entirely sure if a more defensive approach should be what is aimed for. But
again, I think if you just ignore dodging and just pretend this wasn't here and it was just roll your attack as normal with any kind of appropriate modifiers that are already in play, I think you're fine to just ignore the dodging rule in this game. No need to house rule it or change it, just ignore it.
But then we have using firearms in close combat. Which, basically, you try and use firearms when you're in close combat, a +2 modifier is applied to the roll to hit. Though it does note, only handguns and submachine guns can be used in this way unless a weapon states otherwise. All other firearms are considered ineffective in close combat unless the GM deems it cinematically appropriate. This is another one that I would end up playing fast and loose, because I freely admit a lot of my Cyberpunk campaigns are one step removed from a John Woo movie. Especially, there's been multiple times where I've tried to do something like the hospital scene in Hard Boiled, or the tea house. If you've seen Hard Boiled, you know how chaotic those particular scenes are. But then we have fleeing from combat. And once the declaration to flee has been declared, any close combat attacks declared against that combatant receive a -2 modifier on the roll to hit. The move action may not be used to charge another combatant when that's declared. When the combat round ends, the character performs their move action and is no longer considered engaged. Okay.
This.
But then we have ranged attacks. I will admit I do have a soft spot for the rail assault rifle that they have here, which they're going to work in a similar manner. The only thing between melee and ranged weapon stats that's different is having a clip. And then we have ranged attack modifiers. So if it's an aimed shot, -1. If it's a snapshot, +1. If the target's in cover, +1 to +3. If the target is moving, +1. So the aimed shot is exactly what you think it is. A snapshot is, I'd say, the equivalent of hip fire.
And weren't we just talking about aimed shots a moment ago?
Mm-hmm. And aim shots do require 2 combat rounds, though this is one of those cases where I think where the 2 combat rounds thing does kind of make sense.
Yeah.
Although,
Taking 2 rounds for the action, so it's not like 2 rounds set up and then the 3rd round you fire.
mm-hmm.
I believe this is reading. It's that 2nd combat round you get your shot.
Yeah. See, then we have cover, which is exactly what it usually is. We do have 3 degrees of them that are in this little chart. Light cover is a +1, heavy cover is +2, and very heavy cover is a +3. So light cover would be things like mesh fences, glass, crates, barrels. Heavy cover would be brick or concrete walls, vehicles, pillars. And very heavy cover would be things like thick concrete, industrial steel, or armored vehicles. And cover, in addition to the modifier to roll to hit, cover applies the same modifier to a target's protection rating for the purposes of resolving any damage. So that's something a lot of people don't think about. They just have a modifier to hit, not a modifier to damage. So good call bringing that up here. Let's see, and then moving targets, self-explanatory. Weapon range, we've already talked about the range thing. The listed range is the maximum range. And we have fire modes, which are the fire modes that we have here are for cases where you're not firing just single shot. You've got burst, which takes 3 rounds. You can re-roll any 1 die rolled for damage of this weapon. Any 11s rolled during the skill test to hit are turned into 12s. So essentially, you can re-roll, but your critical failure rate goes up by 1. Then there's suppressive, which takes 10 rounds. This is your DACA. You apply a -1 modifier to the skill roll to hit. You can re-roll any or all dice rolled for damage. Any 10s or 11s are treated as 12s. Any target hit with a suppressive volley loses 1 additional morale regardless of how much damage is inflicted. In addition, any morale test taken as a result of damage from a suppressive volley has a +1 modifier.
Now, this is where, off the top of my head, I'm not as quick to convert these numbers to what their percentages would be. But looking at how burst reads, I'm unsure of how that reads would actually be worthwhile. What are the actual odds of rolling the 11 and 12? Let's
Let's double check.
Lower than 10% and higher than 5% to land on any individual number. I'd say roughly 16% chance to hit an 11 and 12.
So getting any individual number on a D12 is a 9.09 repeating chance.
Alright, so I was close.
So getting 2 numbers, so 11 and 12, let's double that. That's a 18.18%. So I'd say that's...
And if you reroll, there's a second chance to hit a failure, though.
Yeah.
So this is one of those things I'm a little up in the air on just because statistics are weird.
Yeah.
I don't know if people really understand how bizarre statistic numbers actually get, but I don't know if this is just even worthwhile to try a burst, is what it comes down to.
Oh, if you don't have enough rounds for suppressive, you might have to stick with burst. Like if you
Or just regular fire. Unless you have to burst.
Mm-hmm. But I more importantly, I think you can only use either of these if your weapon has it.
Yeah.
Like
and I imagine you're making a choice between the burst or that, unless it has to burst.
I'd say most of the time it's not going to have to. These are option, but you have to declare them before any dice are rolled. See, then we have throwing weapons. The main thing to note with them is that they have a range of close unless noted otherwise. Then we have grenades and explosives. The blast radius is within the immediate vicinity. GM is final arbiter on that matters. Obviously, some explosives are going to have a large blast radius. A single roll to hit is made to land a grenade or missile weapon on a target location, and everyone in the blast radius is subject to the damage inflicted. A failed roll to hit with an explosive projectile will cause the device to scatter off target as specified by the GM, after which the explosion should still be resolved. A critical failure with a grenade will result in the device being fumbled, dropped, and detonating on the thrower, where damage should be calculated as normal. Planted explosives, such as charges and mines, don't require a roll to hit. Instead, a weapons tech roll is performed to correctly set them up. When they're triggered, they'll automatically hit anyone within the blast radius. A failure will cause the explosive to not be correctly armed, whereas a critical failure will result in the explosive detonating in the user's hands. Try not to let that happen. But then we have resolving attacks. After the skill test has been performed, the attack action can be resolved. If the skill test is passed, the attack hits and damage is calculated. If the test is failed, the attack misses. A critical failure in close combat will result in the combatant dropping their weapon, or if they are unarmed, stumbling and being knocked down. During a ranged attack, a critical failure represents a weapon jam, which must be fixed before the weapon can be used again. Then we have damage. And damage is always done with a mix of D12 and D3 dice, sometimes with a static modifier. So you're either inflicting endurance damage, or E, or psychological damage, which is noted as P for pressure. And it is endurance and pressure are once again your physical and mental hit points. And if you're at 5 or less, you're considered to be in a critical state. So if your endurance is 5 or lower, your brawn, reflexes, and gut stats are all reduced by 2 while you're in that state, and a +1 modifier is applied to all medical skill tests required to heal you. If your pressure is at 5 or lower, your brain's perception and allure stats are all reduced by 2 while you're in that, and you can't spend grit. You can recover lost hit points through medical treatment, such as a med kit. That end, physical damage can result in a reduction of morale. Low morale can cause problems during combat situations. So then we have an EMP, which is basically a means to shutting down cybernetics. Can make that a dead weight. It's not doing any physical damage, but it can shut down electronic devices for a minimum of 3 combat rounds. Usually the duration will be noted on whatever is inflicting it. Let's see, then we have stunned, which, if you're stunned, you act last, regardless of your initiative. So then we have knockdowns, which are treated as an optional rule. If an attack inflicts 10 or more points of damage, it has the chance to knock an opponent down. This is an additional skill test using Brawn, considering the character to be skilled. If it's passed, the character remains standing. If it's failed, they're knocked over and considered to be prone. There's also we also have a thing on hit locations, which is a D12 roll. And if I'm being honest, I wouldn't see myself using hit locations for this kind of game.
Yeah. I kind of like hit locations as an idea, but something like this, which is running a lot more simplified and light, I don't think I'd want to tag this on.
Mm-hmm.
I will say in the case of the knockdown tests.
Yeah.
I don't know if I would default them all to bronze stat because there's nothing saying it has to be like close range. It specifies any damage. And if I do that damage with a sniper shot, why am I using brawn?
I think that's one of those cases where you'd have to play it by ear.
Yeah. I wouldn't specify it to brawn. I'd just maybe use the actual skill. I don't know. I think that'd make the most sense with a sniper shot.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I'd change it to the weapon or attack skill you're using rather than brawn.
Yeah, I would say that's the case. But
yeah, there's also optional bleeding rules. Kind of works how you'd expect.
Yeah. Then we have armor, which the armor profile has three parts of it. Protection, how much endurance damage the armor will reduce. Tolerance, the amount of punishment the armor can take before it's rendered useless. And special rules under, well, rules. And I do like that armor's protection is essentially an anti-damage roll, as opposed to being a static thing. I mean, there are static modifiers when it comes to armor, but you get the idea. But and there is an optional thing for armor damage, which is what it sounds like. This is where the tolerance comes in. Each time the armor is struck with an attack that inflicts 5 or more points of damage before protection is applied, 1 point of tolerance is lost for every 5 points of damage inflicted. When it reaches 0, it's no longer capable of providing the wearer with adequate protection and is destroyed. I see what it's doing there. I am iffy about whether or not I'd go with that in this game.
Yeah.
Like, if you want something a bit more simulationist with armor, it's there. Or if you want people to have more upkeep. But Gaia Complex does not strike me as a very simulationist kind of affair.
Yeah, I'm not too fun because I read over stacking armor too. Just because it like specifies you can like say have the helmet and vest, you can't stack 2 vests. That makes sense, but that's one of those things that unless you're doing like the called shots, I don't think there's really a need to go out of your way to also take into account specific body part protection like helmet and vest.
Mm-hmm.
And it would seem weird to stack those modifiers together to me.
I will note one of the other reasons I don't use the typical called shots is because random hit locations can get very weird when you're dealing with melee combat. They work perfectly fine for ranged combat, though.
Yeah. Like, I punch you! Random location. Foot. Huh! What led us to this scenario?
Mm-hmm.
Funny. I kind of like funny sometimes. But that really depends on the game, I think.
Yeah. But then we have morale, which we've kind of hinted at a few times, and it's kind of funny that it's brought up multiple occasions, but it's a optional thing. A character's maximum morale is determined during character creation and can be reduced during combat situations. When you gain morale, it can never rise above the maximum value. Every time a character loses 3 or more endurance from a single attack, they lose 1 point of morale. If you suffer the loss of any endurance from a suppressive ranged attack, you lose an additional point. Whenever you enter a critical state, you immediately lose 2 morale. When a combatant's morale has been reduced to 5, they're required to take a morale test. This is taken in the same way that an active skill test is taken using your guts stat. Considering the character to be skilled, they need 1 success. If the test is passed, you continue as normal. If the test is failed, you're considered pinned in whatever cover you currently occupy. If you're not in cover, you have to spend your next action diving for the nearest available cover where you will be pinned. A pinned character can be rallied by selecting the rally action during a combat round. Whenever this happens, the character simply takes another morale test as described above. And of course, there are worse effects if you have as you get closer to 0. And you can recover morale by either spending grit, you get 1 when the encounter ends, when receiving medical aid, when receiving skilled leadership, when being extracted, pulled out of combat, or rescued, or every 4 hours since the last combat encounter. And what they mean by skilled leadership is that somebody who has the leadership skill can attempt a skill test for that as a free action to recover morale for allies. This is essentially their way of doing the rally. I don't know, what's your take on how morale works here?
What would the average morale of a character be expected to be? That's the first thing I'd want to know. Because if it's too easy to hit this low number, I think this system could become frustrating if you included morale.
Yeah, let me check something. So, I'm on a separate tab. I'm going back to the going merc thing so I can see.
Yeah.
So I can remind myself since it's been about a week. So
that's really what it comes down to: is how easily are you going to hit that low morale? Because if this becomes like a regular occurrence, it's going to constantly be plaguing you.
So
I don't think it'd be a worthwhile thing to do.
Your max morale is twice your gut stat, minimum 6.
And how high did the stats go in this again? At least early on?
1 to 10. So you can't
So minimum 6.
You can't have at the start you can't have more than 1 stat at 9.
So maximum 18 if you're going a high guts character.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to lean I don't think I like this. It feels a little too easy to lose a lot of morale quickly. See, what are the actual penalties for falling low? See, if you're at 2 morale, the character is automatically pinned as though they had failed the morale test. Okay. At 1, the character is automatically pinned as though they had failed the morale test. The character can no longer take the rally action. And at 0, the character will freeze and be entirely unable to act. Oh, so once you hit 0 morale, it's just you're a non-entity.
Mm-hmm. And your morale is reduced to 0. You lose 3 points of pressure.
Have we covered what pressure is?
Yeah, pressure is the psychological hit points.
Ah, okay.
You know, the mental equivalent to endurance.
I think we've just referred to it as your mental so far.
Mm-hmm.
Completely spaced. It was called pressure.
Yeah. Like if somebody wanted to do a darker tone or re-emphasize a higher lethality, I could see them going with morale. But I think that's the reason it's going to be an optional thing, because it's for those who want to lean in that direction. But
now, let's say you do want to lean in that direction. You include morale. I think just because of how easy this can drop, you have the issue that it kind of makes guts a priority stat for everybody. I don't see how you could just justify that not being an important stat, regardless of your build, just based on how I think these numbers would play out.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's one of those things, I don't say this with extreme confidence, because we haven't sat down with the system. It's just kind of what I'm able to run through my head right now.
There's also
I think you have to revamp how it works.
It's going to be up to the GM on how effective it would be, because of the fact that there's too many variables when it comes to setting up a conflict scenario.
Now, if you're a GM and you're picking up this game, I think it's probably because it is a bit of a lighter one, in part. Simpler to run. So I'm going to say I don't really like this for this system.
Yeah.
Because I think you'd have to do add a lot more onto the GM to figure out how to work it well.
Mm-hmm.
Which seems to be going against what a lighter system wants to do.
Yeah. But then we have health and healing. Obviously, the first things that are covered are endurance and pressure, and the ways to recover, either with endurance, medical aid, clinic treatment, or just time. With pressure, things like a neural flush, therapy, or again, time. Then we have toxins, which because instead of going through a bunch of different variations, we just have moderate toxins and serious toxins. The former reduces brawn, reflexes, and perception by 1, and you lose 1 endurance every 12 hours. Serious reduces those 3 stats by 2, and you lose 3 endurance every 12 hours. But then we get to cybernetics, which, of course, have their own profile. There's the disconnect, i.e. how much the amount of disconnect that you lose when the enhancement is installed. We kind of talked about this with connection, which was kind of the cap about how much cybernetics you can take. The fact that disconnect is a die roll also means that there is a bit of risk when installing cybernetics.
This is one of those things, like, I do kind of like that it's not a consistent with it, so you don't always know. So again, like you said, there is kind of a risk something's going to go wrong, but what happens if the disconnect hits 0?
Yeah. Then slots. This determines how many slots it's taking up on your body, or if you're following up on that, and then obviously rules for each individual one. Then we have doubling up on options. There are some. In some cases, you can add the same option to 2 pieces of cybernetics, like if somebody's purchased 2 cyber eyes, and then they can add the option to both eyes. But I should clarify, these slots is essentially how many things you can add on to that particular cybernetic. All options and weapons use exactly 1 slot unless stated otherwise.
Oh yeah, this is slightly unrelated, but the doubling up and just the sudden mention of the eyes reminded me. I never got around to playing a cyberpunk game, but a group I was with almost ended up running one, and I'd realized the stupidest thing. It was cheaper to get 2 monocles with more effects than it was to just get a pair of glasses with all the same effects. Which was the inspiration for my crazy Victorian bomberman wearing 2 monocles.
But
yes.
Yeah, then we have cybernetic installation. Typical installation takes between 2 and 12 hours, depending on complexity. Or half a day for limb replacement or the installation of a neural frame. You do have DIY installation, which is a way to do it on the cheap, but it's also risky because you could take some damage when doing so, as well as bleeding and an additional 1d12 reduction to disconnect if you fail the medical test when trying to install cybernetics. Although I do love the quote here. Relax. I've done this at least twice before and it worked out fine almost half the time. Of course, as mentioned before, cybernetics can be damaged. Though the main way is through EMPs. And then we have disconnect, which we kind of hinted at before. And
now, how did we determine what your max disconnect is? Because this goes up to 51 plus is when there's no penalty, so it's got to be a high number.
Actually, if you're a human, your disconnect is 80 plus twice your allure. If you're a feral, it's equal to 50 plus twice your allure.
Okay.
And you cannot increase disconnect.
And I'm going to hazard a guess it doesn't heal.
No.
Otherwise, this whole disconnect damage thing would be entirely stupid and pointless. If at some point we see there is a rule about healing disconnect, I would strongly suggest ignoring that rule.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, disconnect can never be regained. Specifies it right there.
And it is basically a gradual psychological decline.
Yeah, just more cybernetic, less human. Typical theming for cyberpunk games.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. Then we have a thing on language. The main thing to note with language is that your brain stat determines how fluent you can be with a language. At 6, able to understand the most common local dialects and understand the basics. At 7, able to speak one additional dialect and understand the basics of others. At 8, able to speak 2 additional dialects and understand the basics of others. And 9 or higher, able to speak all the dialects spoken in New Europe.
So effectively, it sounds like everyone's basically speaks the same language in this world. But the smarter you are, the easier it is to understand the crazy southerner.
Yeah.
Talking about licking up a typhoon or whatever they say these days.
I was gonna say, and at 10, you can understand, you can legitimately pronounce that one town name in the UK. You know the one. Oh.
But yeah, after that, we got the vehicles and transport section.
Yep.
At a glance, the vehicles and transport, pretty self-explanatory. Like for your vehicles, we have the same kind of setup with any of the other gear. Where each one has like a speed, a cap for passengers and drivers, protection, endurance, special rules and equipment.
Mm-hmm.
So we probably move right along to drones next, I'd say.
Yeah, which is operating under that same principle. You have it. You have the speed. You have the speed of it. You have the protection. You have endurance. The only thing that a drone doesn't have is cap because, well, it's a drone. I do like that rolls to hit an active drone have a +2 modifier, which, makes sense because drones are going to be smaller than a person.
Yeah.
Some drones possess a sentry mode, which is essentially a pause state where they observe and don't move. This is basically their version of Overwatch.
And then similarly, we have animals and meld, which if you're melding with the animal, here are your stats.
Mm-hmm.
The animals will come with their own set of skills.
Yep.
Otherwise, pretty much the same. I will note, I don't think we specifically mentioned this when we looked at meld earlier. You're choosing to either act as yourself or as the animal you melded with.
In other words, you're treating an animal as a drone.
Yeah. I'm assuming that... I don't think it's specified with drones yet. But I'm assuming the animals and drones are going to mechanically work the same way.
More or less. And lastly, we have encumbrance. So, i.e., how much you can carry around. You're able to carry one large item for every 2 ranks you have in brawn, and carry one small item for every rank you have in brawn.
I'm fine with this.
Yeah.
I actually do like encumbrance rules, just not when it gets to, like...
You don't like
0.1 pounds.
You don't like it when it comes to pounds or kilograms. You prefer a more slot approach, which this definitely has.
It makes sense, and it's not the insanity that Dungeons and Dragons got with what the fuck are we doing adding up decimal points.
Yeah, there's a reason I use a... If you want to know my guess as far as why it ends up working like that, part of it is tradition, and part of it is the fact that D&D has its origins in the college historical know-it-all crowds. If you know what I mean.
Yeah.
The type of people who think that you need to make that your fantasy setting has to realistically depict medieval Europe as close as possible. Because they were also running medieval reenactments of historical battles in the wargaming scene in the 70s.
Yeah. But yeah, I think that wraps up what we were talking. Because next is chapter 4 of the core, so...
Yeah,
that kind of clears up the valley for the day.
So, I think our thoughts when it comes to the core mechanics as we went into it through this, and with a lot of materials, is... The core is fun. the D12 based approach is fine. I do like that things like armor and protection and the like are not static. I think the only problems that we had are disagreements on some of the optional rules and disagreements on some parts of multi-action economy.
I will also say the game is weirdly specific in setting restrictions in some ways, but not others. Like, what was it? The whole, you can only go over X number of obstacles during your move. That was weirdly specific. But then some of the other rulings seem just a lot more vague than I would have liked.
I could definitely see. So what you're saying is it's shooting for a very theater of the mind approach, but there's some parts that feel a little simulation-y leaning.
Yeah.
I could certainly see that.
Like, I think the core mechanics, as you said, they're well done, they're fun.
Yeah.
But I think it needs a little bit more consistency with how it wants to do certain things. And a bit more clarification on some other minor bits.
I will admit, when it comes to a good amount of the optional rules, you're not likely to see me use a good amount of them.
Yeah.
Hit location, I could only see myself using that if you're up against something big. Like say you've got a party of mercenaries who are fighting a tank.
Obviously, this hit location chart wouldn't apply, but
or only using hit locations for ranged attacks. But things like morale...
If you're fighting something so big like a tank, and you're just a bunch of bodies on the ground and not in your own vehicle, I'd almost just designate each part as a different thing. Like, I think something similar was done with Heavens and Heresies when we played that game. That was ages ago. Where the giant monster had, like, different bits, and when you broke so many, then it went down.
Yeah, that's since been refined. Like, the versions of Heavens and Heresies that you and I were in is not exactly the same as the one that was during the Cloister.
Yeah. But point in case, I think if you're doing something like that against a big thing and a bunch of little guys, that might be the better approach than this hit detection system or hit location.
Yeah. As far as morale goes, that one I could only see if I want to double down on grit, and to be honest, I usually have other ways of doubling down on grit mechanically than, say, morale.
Yeah.
But overall, I'd say those are minor issues in the grand scheme of things. Like very much minor. But
well, on one hand, I agree. They all are minor issues, but there's a number of them. And while it is kind of a solid idea at its core, I'm not sure if anything about the system is like really grabbed at me.
Oh.
That said, I think we're starting to get into what might be final thoughts in a couple weeks.
Yeah. We'll revisit some of those, because now we did dip a little bit into hacking, but we're not going to be dipping whole into it this week. That is going to happen next week. So until then, on behalf of the good brothers present and not present, my name is Mildra. I am your gaming monk. Stay fucking frosty, everybody.
星体。